I recently passed 1,000 subscribers, and the popular custom when you hit a milestone like that is to do a question and answers video, which I will get to. But a less popular custom that I think should be a more popular custom is shoutouts. So I'm going to give some shoutouts to a couple of channels that I think deserve it. The first shoutout I want to give is to JJDiscussions. I always feel very nostalgic whenever I watch his videos because he looks and acts exactly the same way a lot of my friends in high school looked and acted.
Hey guys, I'm Onision, and I'm here to tell you some useless shit.
My friends in high school were all very sarcastic people. And the second person I want to shout out is PharaohHazard, because I think she is probably one of the funniest vloggers on YouTube. She's right up there with Jenna Marbles.
One of the problems I have nowadays with people, and parents in general, they're too afraid to talk to their kids about sex. They don't want to scar them for life. But let me explain something to you, honey. It's gonna scar your daughter a lot more when a guy sticks his cock up her vagina and she starts bleeding all over the place and she doesn't know what the fuck to think.
Now see, that is just good advice. Okay, so on to the questions. The first question is, what do you want to do with your life? And I hate that question, but I'm gonna answer it anyway. Saying what you want to do with your whole life seems like too much of a commitment to me. Ask me what I want to do with my day. That I can answer. But I guess what I'd like to do eventually, maybe not with my life, but sometime, is make political and philosophical documentaries, like Alain de Botton, like Slavoj Žižek. I'll leave links to some of the work that they've done in the description box. Second question is, why is this video not in black and white? Well, that's because you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. The next question is, have you ever considered dystheism, the notion that God might exist but not as an all-loving being, but rather as possibly an evil being? It's a frightening possibility, no? Frightening, yes. Possibility, no. And would you worship God if he were evil? If I were convinced that God exists but that he were evil, I don't think I could worship him. Even if I pretended to worship him to avoid hell, I don't think that would really count because it could never be sincere. Next question is, what is the process that you go through when you make videos? I notice that your videos are very short considering the topics you discuss, and your points are always made in a clear and concise manner, which is why I love watching your videos. I'm just wondering how you do it. Well, first of all, thank you. My process mainly is that when I hear something being discussed and I develop my own interest in it, I'll form my own opinions, and then I will spend several hours trying to find the best way to communicate that opinion. I spend the vast majority of my spare time walking around town, drinking coffee, and thinking of the best way to make a particular argument. Sometimes I'll repeat one single sentence over and over and over again in my head, or sometimes out loud, and I'll try to come up with a way of saying it that's both as precise as possible and as concise as possible. I've spent a lot of time arguing with people over the internet over the last 15 years, and when you make arguments over the internet, you're stuck with word limits and comment sections and whatnot, so you're sort of forced to make your argument as simply as possible. But also I found that when you're arguing with people, if you don't make your argument as clear and as precise as possible, if there's any ambiguity in what you're saying, then the person you are arguing with will take that ambiguity and they will twist it to their own advantage. So those things have gotten me in the habit of trying to make my arguments as clear, simple, and concise as possible. Next question is, parents choosing religious healing, substituting actual medicine equals killing kids. What's up with that? Are you asking me to explain the motivation of that? Because I don't know. I suspect that people who do that see conventional medicine as sort of cheating. Like, if you're going to use antibiotics instead of praying the infection away, then you don't have true faith in God. What are your thoughts on Plantinga's paper, Theism, Atheism, and Rationality? How do you think of rationality vis-a-vis belief in God? Well, I think most definitions of God are incoherent and self-contradictory, so I don't think you could really believe in God, at least as it's defined in the incoherent definitions, and be rational at the same time. As for the Plantinga paper, I haven't read it, so I can't address it directly.
At what point do you, I, and many other YouTubers fail to see that we're not actually doing anything? At what point does what we become ineffective in sending a message and just becoming a quote-unquote slacktivist as a term?
I don't know if there's really all that much of a difference between slacktivism and what is conventionally considered activism. When I was in college, there were a number of student organizations that claimed to be engaging in activism, but it seemed like most of the time this activism took the form of activities designed to raise awareness. And this largely consisted of standing someplace holding a sign and chanting slogans, or marching down the street holding signs and chanting slogans. And while that's considered legitimate activism, I don't see how it's really any better than going on the internet and making a video or sharing a link to some cause on Facebook. And the danger of both, of course, is that people sometimes get themselves involved with them without really fully understanding the cause that they're advocating. However, while most of the time the videos that we make or the things that we say on the internet probably aren't doing all that much, every now and then you do see results. There is no shortage of stories of people who have hit hard times and whose tale of woe has made it onto the internet, and as a result, if they needed money, they've been given lots of money, or if they have been wronged by some corporation, and enough people will make a stink about it that the corporation will do right by them, etc., etc. So in particular circumstances like that, slacktivism can actually pay off. What's not so easy to see is if you say something that affects somebody's life but you never hear about it. There are plenty of opinions and ideas that I've heard that I think have made me a better person and have made my life better, but I often never get in touch with the people from whom I've heard those ideas to tell them how much they've done for me. So a lot of the time, while it seems like we may be doing nothing, we may be doing something significant that we'll never find out about. Do you believe in a socialized economic system? That is, do you believe workers should control the means of production? Well, in a sense I do. I don't think you'll find too much disagreement with the idea that an economy functions more efficiently when the means of production are privately owned and privately operated. But at the same time, I also like democracy, so I like the idea that the general population can also enact laws regulating how the owners of the means of production can operate their businesses. And I think reasonable people can disagree about what the right balance is between public regulation and private ownership and operation of the means of production. But what I don't see as reasonable is what seems to me to be fanatical dogmatism on either side of the economic political spectrum. I don't agree with the people who think that everything would be so much better if we just relinquished all control of the means of production to private hands, and the market will always be the most efficient way, and markets can do no wrong. I think that belief borders on a kind of fundamentalism. At the same time, I'm also not a communist. I also don't think that central planning is the best way to go. I think the main argument of the zeitgeist people is that nowadays we have enough information technology that we can run a centrally planned economy really efficiently now. I'm deeply skeptical of that. And I think the people who believe in that system also tend to border on fundamentalism.
So the Messianic Manic has finally decided to actually grace us with his answers to our questions. So, I'm just curious if there are any opinions you've held throughout your life that, in retrospect, you're legitimately ashamed of. If so, what are they and why? And if not, why not?
I don't think there are any beliefs that I ever had about which I really feel ashamed, but there are a lot of beliefs that I had when I was a kid that I look back on now and think that they are very silly. For instance, when I was in junior high, I used to be very much in favor of capital punishment. When I was in the 8th grade, I wrote a paper about how awesome the penal system in Singapore was and how we should have a system like that here in Canada. At the time, there was a story in the news about this American kid who went to Singapore and he vandalized a bunch of cars, and he was arrested and he was sentenced to a caning. And of course Americans went completely apeshit over this. Oh my god, an American kid is going to be caned. But my attitude at the time was, fuck yeah, fuck that kid, cane his ass. And I thought we could really significantly reduce crime if we did stuff like that in Canada. Now of course I know that the reason why Singapore has so much less crime than the West has to do with more than just the fact that they have a draconian penal system. But now I think it's more effective and humane to try to attack crime by addressing the social and economic roots of crime, rather than trying to simply brutalize it out of existence. I have no figures to support it, but I'm going to start off with the assumption that most conspiracy theorists are quite non-religious. So my thinking is that the conspiracy theory fills the same need for seeing an agent behind all things as the religious find in God. What's your take on it? Well, it actually seems to me like a lot of the conspiracy theorists are actually quite religious. Alex Jones is very religious, the birthers are very religious, I even think that a lot of the truthers are quite religious. But the connection I see between believing in religion and believing in conspiracy theories is that Religious people and conspiracy theorists like to feel like they're privy to some special knowledge that to which other people are just completely blinded, and it's their mission in life to open people's eyes. Where does baby oil come from? Coconuts and brown cows. If you had 3 wishes, well, if your first wish was a really clever, really good wish, I don't see why you would need the other 2. So I guess my only wish would really be to be able to grant my own wishes. Ginger or Marianne? Well, neither really. I like Mrs. Howell. 1, because I like the older ladies, and 2, because she's rich.
Would you rather be hated forever or completely forgotten?
Well, I guess it would depend on what I was being hated for. If sometime in the future the world is taken over by Nazis and they discover my videos and they all hate me because I'm anti-Nazi, that'd be pretty cool. Which do you prefer and why? Utilitarianism, virtue ethics, Kantianism/deontology. Well, the one my conscience likes best is utilitarianism. The idea of the greatest good for the greatest number makes a lot of sense to me. Now, criticism I often hear of utilitarianism is that it doesn't really care that much for individual rights. It sounds like it's a very sort of majoritarian ethos. But I don't think that's necessarily the case, because although utilitarianism prefers what is good for the masses over what is merely good for an individual, you have to remember that the masses are made up of individuals, and I think the masses are altogether better off if the individuals of which those masses are comprised have certain rights that can't be taken away by a simple majority vote. I like virtue ethics as well, because the main point of virtue ethics seems to be that you should do what helps you cultivate virtues, what helps you cultivate good, healthy habits. And I think that's a good idea. The problem with virtue ethics is that it can't really be used to help you solve complex moral quandaries. For instance, I don't think there's anything in virtue ethics that can tell you whether a human embryo should or should not be given the same rights as an adult human being. Now, deontology is a little bit more complicated. The main gist of it seems to be that you should always act out of moral principles, even if acting out of those principles leads to very negative consequences. For example, you should never lie, even if lying can save lives or save people from suffering. Because even though avoiding telling that lie may cause thousands of deaths or cause very severe suffering, to compromise moral principles in any particular instance is essentially to throw away your entire moral compass. And I think the problem with that is that it allows the perfect to stand in the way of the good, and when you allow the perfect to stand in the way of the good, you often end up in a situation that is neither perfect nor good. I think if you were to act according to the prescriptions of deontological ethics, it would essentially turn you into Rorschach from The Watchmen. What is your opinion on animal rights and contemporary animal rights arguments made by theorists like Peter Singer? That's a complicated enough question that I think I'm going to save that one for a whole other video. Considering he just passed away, I was wondering your opinion of Gore Vidal and his various works. Well, I've never actually read anything that Gore Vidal has actually written. I liked him in Gattaca, and I've seen him in a few interviews, and he always seems very charming. But the coolest thing I ever heard about Gore Vidal is that apparently back in the 50s or 60s, he was one of the first few open bisexuals, and he was being interviewed by someone who asked him, was the first person that you had sex with male or female? And his response was, I was too polite to ask. Which I think was a very smooth and clever way to tell the interviewer that he should fuck off with such a disrespectful question. Although I know that near the end of his life he expressed some support for the 9/11 truth movement, which made him a little bit of a crank in some people's eyes. But nonetheless, I've always found him very entertaining to listen to. Favorite soda? I like root beer. And are you a folder or a scruncher? Well, when I was a kid I was a scruncher, but as I grew older and more sophisticated I became a folder.
My main question is, how can theists such as myself improve our appearance or reputation or what have you, especially on YouTube, but even outside of YouTube, just in general, with regard to non-believers, without compromising our beliefs or actions?
Sometimes I've wondered, if I were a Christian, how would I talk about my religion? How would I defend it? And one thing I decided was I would not try to defend it using science or evidence or even really argument or reason. Doing that most of the time seems to make religious people come off as silly. The second thing I would never do is scold people, because I don't think scolding people wins converts. I also wouldn't tell people that they are sinners in need of salvation from a righteous punishment. That may be what I would believe, but I wouldn't use that to defend my religion or promote it, because I just don't think doing that would be effective. What I would do is say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Buddhist, whatever. This is the way I live my life, and I love it, and I think if other people gave it a try, they would love it as well. Now, if I personally heard that, that would not convince me of the truth of the religion. It wouldn't convert me to a particular religion. But if that were the general approach of religious people who proselytize, I would find them a lot easier to get along with.
How'd you decide on your username?
My username comes from the lyrics of the song Megalomaniac by KMFDM. And surprisingly, in the entire time that I've had my YouTube channel, only 2 people have ever actually figured that out. If anybody else out there has figured it out but they just didn't tell me, you get 100 cool points from me personally. So that's my questions video. I hope it wasn't too long and boring for all of you. And thanks for subscribing.